branch of the National Union of Petroleum and Natural Gas Workers, NUPENG, has threatened strike over the illegal activities and high-handedness, according to it, of some of the security agents, particularly the military task force in the Port Harcourt zone of the Union. Now, the national chairman of the PTD NUPENG, Comrade Oloki Oseswa, told reporters that men of the military task force in Port Harcourt had burned two trucks conveying HPFO, otherwise known as black oil, on Tuesday night as the truck drivers were falsely accused of transporting crude oil.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Zibby. So, first of all, for our listeners, heavy fuel oil is also known as bunker fuel or residual fuel oil, and it's a result of the remnants from the distillation and cracking process of petroleum. Now, reading this story, it's very shocking if these allegations are in fact true. Now, what is alleged? Two trucks were conveying 40,000 liters each of HFPO from the modular refinery in Imo State to River State. And along the way, the drivers were intercepted by military men of the military task force. And the drivers allegedly presented all the documents showing where the HFPO came from and where it was headed to. And it is alleged that the soldiers took away the trucks and later had them burnt on the allegations that they were carrying stolen crude.
Mm.
Now, a number of things jump out from the story. So let's assume all the facts of the story as presented are true right now. How the soldiers on the field or on the highway or on the road immediately determined that the HFPO in the trucks was stolen crude? Did
Mm.
they carry out any scientific process? Did they have any equipment? What process did they undertake or carry out to arrive at that conclusion? And even when, two, let us even flow from that scenario or that
Mm.
assumption that it was stolen crude. Did they not behoven them to carry out further investigations, taking the, take the drivers into custody and carry out further investigations or hand over to the police to find out, okay, where is this alleged stolen crude from?
Mm.
And then what else is going on to see whether there's a bigger picture that is about to develop. But with a culture of impunity, it is alleged that the trucks were simply burnt and that the monies that would have been paid for that significant amount of HFPO is gone. Now, it behoves on the authorities to investigate this matter completely, not a surface level or window dressing investigation. The officers that were attached to that particular location have to be called in for questioning, and then they then have to explain or justify why the trucks were burnt. Because if they don't, we've all been witnesses to the severe strain and trauma we've experienced over the past 8 weeks with respect to getting petrol.
Mm.
Now, if this union goes on strike, it will be very serious. And remember, we're less than 5 weeks away or 6 weeks away from a major election. We simply cannot afford this. And if any officers have been shown or established to have acted with impunity without any regard to due process and the provisions of the law, such officers should be dealt with in accordance with the law.
There was an incident last year, might have been in October or September. I'm trying to remember the exact time, where a vessel was destroyed by men of the Nigerian military because it was said to have contained stolen crude. And there was a lot of protest and complaints about that. And I remember the military bosses said it was in line with the rules of their engagement and there was really nothing wrong with this. Is this perhaps standard procedure?
I'm a bit surprised when you say it's in line with their rules of engagement because your rules of engagement cannot and will never trump the law. Now, the law is if a crime is alleged to have been committed, then the accused persons should have their day in court, wherein you present the charges against the accused persons and you present the evidence you have against them, and then they then have the opportunity to clear their names, to put in a defense. But when you destroy the evidence,
Hmm.
are the military authorities then suggesting that there will be no due recourse to the law and that innocent people can be accused and then lose their properties? So we must be very careful not to act indiscriminately, not to act with impunity, and to follow the law. There is the reason why the law exists. It's not for decoration, it's not for fancy, it's there to guide and order our lives.
All right. And speaking of Nupeng's decision to go on a strike, are there perhaps other ways that individuals or these organizations can actually express their discontent without striking, which of course places undue hardship on regular Nigerians like you and I?
Okay, so what we need to remember is before they resort to a strike, there would have been discussions back channel, there would have been discussions off the public domain where they've tried to present their grievances and they're not getting the responses or the attention they should get. So for them, it's okay, since you people want to, in the popular street lingo, you want to move mad, we will move mad with you. Because it's sad to say this and it's extremely regrettable, but in Nigeria today, it would appear that it is madness that cures madness. So when people do not want to act right, there's no point acting right with them. Now, I'm not supporting madness, but it would appear that this is the only way the Nigerian authorities will respond to grievances that are existing that have been presented to them and have not been dealt with.
Okay, let us know what your thoughts are. The WhatsApp number is 0809 4440981. And you can also tweet at smooth981. I've got a message, and this is from Shegun. Shegun says, the soldiers burns the evidence. Not very smart indeed. But should the nation be ground to a halt because of this incident, please, this striking mentality at every opportunity must be condemned. All right. And let's move on to the next headline. And this one is from Punch. Doctors threaten to shut hospitals over colleague's murder. The Nigerian Medical Association South South Zone has threatened to shut down all hospitals in Delta State to protest the murder of one of its members, Dr. Uyi Ilobe, by gunmen who attacked his hospital in Ethiopia West local government area on New Year's Eve. The chairman of the NMA in Edo State, Dr. Udoka Imosili, had stated this on Tuesday, threatening to commence a one-week shutdown of hospitals in the state. Now, there was a statement that was released, and part of it said, while we mourn the unfortunate murder of our colleague, we wish to assure all our members in the South South Zone that we shall pursue this case to its logical conclusion. While the South South Caucasus Zone, in conjunction with the Delta State branch of NMA, is working hard to unravel the circumstances behind this unwarranted murder of a dutiful medical doctor. The zone strongly condemns this dastardly act in the interim, and it went on to list some of its resolves. So the backstory is a doctor was allegedly murdered in hospital. At first, they said it was by members of the family of a patient who had passed away, but the police did come out and say it was by cultists, suspected cultists, in his hospital.
Okay, thank you, Zibby. So, first things first, our thoughts go out to the family of the late Dr. Uyulobe, and we pray that they receive the grace to bear this sad and untimely loss. Now, what happened is that he was killed in his hospital on New Year's Eve. Now, there are varying contentions as to what exactly happened. What are the circumstances that led to his murder? One version by the police is that there was a female individual who had presented herself to the hospital as a patient. And while he was attending to her, she made a call to some unknown armed individuals who then stormed the hospital and killed the doctor. Then they all fled. The other account is that they were relatives of an aggrieved patient. Now, It is instructive to note that the killers of the late doctor have not yet been apprehended, and there is no discernible or known motive for the commission of the murder. Now, we must remember that there's always a motive behind every criminal or unlawful act. Now, in this case, we're not sure why the late doctor was targeted, why he was attacked, and there's nothing to suggest that anything was stolen from the hospital,
Mm.
either personal effects of the doctor or property belonging to the hospital. Now, it's incumbent upon the Delta State Police Command to continue its investigations and ensure that the perpetrators of this dastardly act are brought to book without without further delay. But we'll continue to monitor the situation, and I must point out this: the doctors are quite aggrieved, but really and truly, they've taken the Hippocratic Oath, and that oath requires them to save lives at all costs first, even before resorting to recovering the financial, the money behind saving the lives. And any strike they embark on will be symbolic. It will be in honor of their slain colleague, but they will get back to work. But this is not to take away anything from this gruesome murder. And beyond the investigation, the police must make the lives of both the doctors and the residents of Delta State more secure.
All right, we've got some messages coming through. Emeka from Amuwo says the silence from mainstream media and social media on Dr. Uyi's death is very unfortunate. From the press statement from the NMA in Delta State, he's lost his lives. Yeah, that was the initial statement. Just like Mr. C pointed out, the investigation is still ongoing, and at the moment, there is no conclusion on how and why he was unfortunately killed. Back to Emeka's message, the quick conclusion of the case by the police was also very painful. It hasn't been concluded yet. All right. Joseph says, good morning, Zibby and Mr. C. Is this how a country is run? Why are terrorists not killed but arrested? Now the arrested tanker driver perceived to be economic sabotage. When was the investigation done or concluded? And who gave them the power to administer judgment when they are not the courts? May God help Nigeria. Okay, Dan says, good morning. The culture of impunity by the government and its agencies has reached unprecedented heights. No democratic country runs its affairs like this. Okay, and let's move on to our third headline. This one is from this day. Court dismisses suit seeking removal of INEC chairman over assets declaration. Several chairmen of political parties in the country have hailed a judgment of the High Court of the Federal Capital Territory, which declared that the assets declaration form of the chairman of the INEC, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, was validly filled, lawful, and in compliance with the law. Now, according to the judgment, which runs contrary to the claim of the, well, claimant, the assets declaration form was fully compliant and valid. Don't forget, we're streaming this live, so if you'd like to catch a glimpse of the studio, you can catch that stream on YouTube. It's at Smooth981 on YouTube, Mr. C.
Okay, so very quickly, Zibby. I'm even surprised the suit was entertained
Mm.
up to the point that a judgment was delivered. But again, that's the job of the courts. Now, the plaintiff or the claimant in this suit, to my understanding, is a meddlesome interloper. Now, I don't know who he is. I don't know what local standard he had to file the suit. But it's instructive to note that his allegations that the INEC chairman hadn't filled out his asset declaration forms properly or hadn't done the proper thing were properly refuted by the INEC chairman, who brought out documents to support his defense that he had done the proper thing. Now, it's disheartening that some fifth columnists and forces determined to ensure that the elections in the next six weeks do not hold or are violently changed are up to no good. They must realize that Nigerians collectively, at this point in time, are determined to
Mm.
ensure that we get the right set of leaders into office. Now, we've known for a while that there were plots to remove the INEC chairman because he is seemingly unyielding to attempts by desperate politicians to subvert the electoral process and ensure that predetermined election results are declared to the people. Now, will this be the last of such attempts? I don't think so. I think there will be more attempts, and it will be instructive to note if this claimant
Mr.
does
Somadina.
does decide to appeal this judgment. It will be very instructive to see
Mm.
because you don't work for INEC, you don't work for the security agencies, and none of the security agencies brought up this matter. So it's instructive that we, as Nigerians, collectively put our support behind the INEC chairman. INEC, under his tenure, has witnessed some innovations, and the introduction of the bimodal voters access system has ensured that the last three elections have actually reflected the will of the people. So, unlike the old days where anyone could pick up PVCs and use them even if the PVCs were not in his name or
Mm.
her name, now with BVAS, it's not just your fingerprints. It's not just your fingerprints. They also take a facial scan, and the two must match. So it's put an end to the plans of some desperate politicians. But where there's life, there's hope, and these desperate politicians will continue to strive, will continue to attempt to subvert the process, and we must collectively say no. That the interest of Nigeria is larger and bigger than the interests of a few disgruntled politicians.
Do you think perhaps people who bring up these frivolous lawsuits should in some way face a penalty of some sort?
So they should, and actually, it should be the lawyers who pay those penalties, who pay those penalties or those sanctions. Because in the UK, for example, they have a split system. You're either a solicitor or a barrister. Now, you cannot start the case in the UK if a solicitor has not given a written opinion as to the viability of a legal action. But here, you can be both a solicitor and a barrister, and we then find that a lot of frivolous suits are filed, and matters that should not clog up the court system and the court system, and that's why we have an unending delay to the delivery of justice. Now, if lawyers were sanctioned for filing frivolous suits,
Mm.
and the penalty should go beyond money, the penalty should include loss of license, your name being struck off the roll.
Wow.
Then the nonsense will stop because then they will tell the party because sometimes these parties put a lot of pressure.
Mm.
Their lawyers trying to make ends meet. It's a lot of money, and then they file frivolous suits that have no basis in court. So when the lawyer knows that he will personally suffer,
Mm.
then the parties will then realize it's no longer business as usual, and we will stop seeing frivolous matters in court.
All right, so I've got a message coming through on YouTube. This one is from Kelvin Adibawale. He says, Zibby, have you noticed how the news so far has been filled with acts of impunity? Sadly, and somewhere in our minds, we know nothing will be done by the police or the authorities. And let's go on to WhatsApp. This one's from Choma. And Choma says, somehow, I think that a popular politician who wants to save face just asked someone to go file a ridiculous suit in the courts because I don't get how certain suits are entertained. All right. Shegun says we must ensure that the INEC chairman is not dubiously removed. Please, does anyone have an idea of when Echo Bridge will be reopened? Um, I don't have any idea of that at the moment, but once we get that information, you certainly will get it. Okay, so let's move on to our next story. And this one is from Punch. Nigeria's debt to hit 77 trillion naira. Loan servicing gulps 5.2 trillion naira. Now, Nigeria's public debt burden may hit 77 trillion if the National Assembly approves the request by the president to restructure the Ways and Means Advances. Now, the Ways and Means Advances is a loan facility through which the central bank finances shortfalls in the government's budget. And again, the government spent 5.24 trillion naira servicing debts in 2022.
Okay. Okay, so the president has sought to incorporate the Ways and Means loans into the nation's debt stock. So what has obtained previously is the Debt Management Office is statutorily responsible for managing the country's debt profile. And the country's debt profile includes sums of money borrowed at the federal level and at state levels. However, the CBN is the banker to the government. And what has obtained previously is that the CBN gives overdrafts or advances to the government to finance short term funding deficits. But those overdrafts were never treated as debt or were never classified as debt. So now they're trying to bring everything together under one umbrella. And in doing that, we're now looking at a debt profile of 77 trillion naira before they exit office on the 29th of May. Now, this 77 trillion naira represents 70 trillion naira debt. Then there's 5 trillion new borrowing and 2 trillion naira promissory notes. Now, quick question that jumps out is, if we owe so much and in 2022 we spent 5.24%, 5.24 trillion naira servicing debt, where are we going to find the money to pay off these debts, fund the capital development that needs to be done, still pay salaries, and progress as a nation? Now, we must face debt side by side with revenue. In October, we saw a jump in revenue to about 1.1 trillion naira. This was on the back of increased oil production and then I think increased oil prices. Now, some of the funding, especially at the federal level, is tied to projects that we can identify, we can easily verify. But at the state levels, it's not so easy to do that. Now, the bigger question is, will there be a cap on borrowing? Because according to Fiscal Responsibility Act, there should be a cap. But are the state governments complying with that act? Is the federal government complying with that act? We cannot continue to increase our hunger for debt borrowing if we haven't sorted out, one, our increased revenue generation, two, we haven't plugged all the leakages and loopholes, and three, we haven't sorted out this issue of corruption that never seems to go away. So, in the interim, you are here for 5 months of 2023, literally. I would advise that unless it is extremely urgent or extremely important, try not to borrow anything in 2023. Let the new guys come in. Whoever, somebody has to win the election anyway. So let the new man come in because they're all men. Let the new man come in and then decide what he's going to do. Haven't seen the books and haven't seen the situation from the inside rather from the outside.
Okay. Don't forget to send your thoughts across via WhatsApp 0809 Deji says, "Good morning. Forensic analysis can still be conducted, and the contents of the tankers can still be identified. Burning does not remove the evidence. Science has evolved well enough to determine a lot of things. If the relevant authorities want to get to really know the tanker's content, they very well can." Okay. Ronti says, "Doctors and health workers need to feel safe to save lives. That is an established principle of quality healthcare delivery."
Okay, so very quickly, I'll respond to the two comments. The last comment first. Is it any surprise or any shock that doctors and nurses want to leave the country when things like this happen? Because if they were safe and their working conditions were fine, they would stay. But with things like this, it will then strengthen the resolve of other doctors who are still here wanting to leave. With regards to Deji's comments, I agree completely. forensic evidence or forensic investigation will only come in if there's anything to be tested, if you find anything that can be examined. If you don't, sorry.
Okay. Idima Puza says Disco increased electricity tariff secretly without corresponding increase in electricity supply. Why? Full scarcity biting harder, yet no increase in electricity. When will the suffering in Nigeria end? Okay. Um, Sunday says the 23 trillion naira overdrafts to the federal government, which breach the Finance Act and international norms, is an impeachable offense for the president of the National Assembly is afraid of doing the needful. They should wield the big axe on the CBN governor by removing him from office. And let's go on to what I think will be our last story. The Minister of Niger Delta Affairs, Chief Umana, has charged members of the governing board of the NDDC to be faithful in the implementation of recommendations of the reports of the Commission's forensic audit. Now, he stated this while inaugurating the new board of the Commission in Abuja, and this was contained in a statement that was signed by the NDDC Director of Corporate Affairs, Ibitoye Abosede.
Okay, so very quickly, this was not necessary if this was a country where the proper thing will be done and done regularly. But because the proper things are rarely ever done properly, this statement had to come out. And he's telling them that they should follow the recommendations of the committee that sat. Now, the committee that investigated did the forensic audit. Now, they're at liberty to disagree with those findings. That's the first point. And if they don't do it, what then are you going to do? You guys are out in May. Literally. Yes, it will be argued that they have statutory flavor, but this is Nigeria. If they want you out, you will leave. You will resign. They will get you to resign. But above this, he says, do not go beyond your contract thresholds. If it's above your contract threshold, refer to the Ministerial Tender Board of the Federal Executive Council. Why is he saying this? Because we found out in time past, in recent past, that what some chief executives of federal government commissions and agencies do is that they split the contracts into smaller sums so that they don't have to go to the Ministerial Tender Board. And when they're found out, there are usually allegations, there's a lot of smoke, a lot of noise, and then everything dies down and it's back to square one. So let's hope this NDDC board will be different. I'm not holding out my breath for that, and we'll just see.
All right. Well, on that note, that brings us to the end of Freshly Pressed this morning. Thank you so much, Mr. C, for being here with us.
Welcome.
Do stay with us. There is a lot more to come on Smooth Breakfast.
The headlines, the stories.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. C.
You're welcome.
In-depth analysis of national current affairs.
Oh, thank you.
Freshly pressed on Smooth 98.1.